Welcome to Buddha Sunshine. In a world where success is often defined by force and achievement, what if the true measure of strength lies not in how much we push, but in how much we release? In today's story, through the journey of a young samurai named Hayato, we will discover that the greatest battles are not fought on the outside. They are the quiet wars within our own minds. Hayato's path is a reminder that the journey to mastery is not always about how much we do, but about how we learn to be at peace with what we are. This story will leave you questioning not just how you approach your own goals, but how you approach your life itself. So let's begin the story. In a quiet village nestled beneath the shadow of mist-covered mountains, there lived a young samurai named Hayato. His family, once renowned for their martial prowess, had fallen from grace. Though still young, Hayato bore the weight of his family's tarnished honor. His heart burned with a desire to restore their name, but he knew the road would be long and difficult. In his mind, there was one way to achieve this: through the perfect mastery of his swordsmanship. Every morning, while the village was still cloaked in the early mist, Hayato would rise before dawn. He would stand before his wooden training dummy, a figure carved in the shape of a warrior, but lacking the sharp edge of a true opponent. For hours, he practiced his form. His strikes were deliberate, his footwork precise, and his breathing controlled. He practiced not only to fight, but to embody the art of kendo, the way of the sword, where the focus was not only on the blade, but on the mind itself. But despite his tireless efforts, Hayato's strikes lacked the power, the fluidity he yearned for. The clang of his sword against the wooden post seemed hollow. The motions felt robotic. Something was missing. One afternoon, an elderly wandering monk passed through the village. He was withered by age, his face lined with years of wisdom, his steps slow but certain. He approached Hayato, who was practicing beneath the ancient oak tree that had witnessed the passage of countless seasons. The monk said, "You wield your sword well, young one, but you are fighting your own shadow." Hayato lowered his sword, his brow furrowed in confusion. "My shadow? I don't understand, monk." The monk sat cross-legged on the grass, his robes flowing like a river. He replied, "Dear Hayato, you are focused on the outcome, on what you wish to become, but you forget the heart of your practice. True mastery comes not from a desire for power, but from the stillness of the mind. When you focus on your movements, not to reach an end, but to move as one with the world, your strikes will be unstoppable." Hayato was silent. He had always believed that practice was about repetition. More strikes, faster, stronger, better. But the monk spoke of something deeper, something intangible. The monk gestured to the trees around them and said, "Look at the way the wind moves through the leaves. It does not hurry, nor does it force its will. It simply is. The blade of a sword should be like the wind, silent, natural, and without resistance. Hayato nodded slowly, but skepticism clouded his thoughts. He had trained his entire life with one goal in mind: to defeat his opponents in battle. Yet, here was this old monk telling him to focus not on victory but on the absence of effort. The monk continued, "Dear Hayato, you must not train for strength. The strength will come from stillness. Let go of your desire to win, and you will find the true path to mastery." That evening, Hayato went back to his training. But this time, he focused not on his sword, but on the space around him. His breathing slowed and his mind quieted. He struck the wooden post once again, but this time, he struck without force, without expectation. The sound of the sword slicing through the air was different. It was clean, precise, like the whisper of the wind. The strike hit its mark with a calm resonance, as if the blade and the post had come into a perfect harmony. Over the following weeks, Hayato continued his training in this new way. Each morning, he practiced with a renewed sense of clarity. He learned to focus not on how many strikes he could make, but on how few were truly necessary. With the time, his movements grew smoother and his understanding deepened. The sword no longer felt like a tool in his hand, but an extension of his own body and soul. One day, as Hayato was finishing his practice, he saw the monk again, sitting quietly beneath the old oak tree, watching him from afar. He had returned, though Hayato had not noticed him until now. The monk's eyes gleamed with quiet approval. "You have changed," the monk said softly. Hayato lowered his sword and approached him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Your words have made all the difference, monk. I understand now what you meant. It's not the force of my strikes that matters, but the harmony between my mind and my actions." The monk smiled gently and said, "Hayato, the sword is but an extension of the heart, and you, young samurai, have begun to find the way of the silent blade." But as quickly as he had arrived, the monk rose to leave. Hayato watched him disappear down the path that led into the mist-covered mountains. That evening, word came that a rival clan had moved closer to the village, seeking to challenge Hayato's family in combat. The villagers, anxious and fearful, looked to Hayato for leadership. His heart swelled, but this time he did not feel the rush of excitement that came with a challenge. He only felt calm, a deep, unshakable stillness. He had become ready, not because he had trained for battle, but because he had learned to fight without resistance. The day of the duel arrived. The rival samurai, eager and brash, marched into the village. They saw Hayato standing alone in the field, his sword resting lightly in his hands, his expression serene. They underestimated him, thinking him weak for his lack of tension. The duel was brief. The rival samurai charged with a wild fury, swinging his katana with all the strength of a storm. But Hayato, calm as the still water of a mountain pond, moved with a spotless grace. His sword flashed, a single strike that was both swift and precise. The rival's sword clattered to the ground, his guard broken, and he was disarmed in an instant. Hayato stood over him, not with a look of triumph, but with the quiet understanding that victory had never been his goal. He had become one with the way of the sword, and in doing so, he had restored the honor of his family. The next morning, when Hayato returned to his training grounds, in the stillness of that beautiful morning, he understood that the blade had always been within him, waiting for the moment when he could wield it not in force but in grace. And from that day on, he practiced not to win, but to become one with the art of the sword, focused, present, and free from the desire to do anything but be. From Hayato's journey, we learned that true strength comes not from force, but from the stillness of the mind. We discovered that mastery is not about endless striving, but about being fully present and letting go of unnecessary expectations. Now, take a moment to ask yourself, where in your life could you use more stillness? How can you shift your focus from pushing harder to embracing the peace in your efforts? Start today, whether it's through mindful practice, quiet reflection, or simply letting go of one thing you have been holding on to too tightly. Like Hayato, your path to strength might just begin with learning how to just be. Thank you so much for joining Buddha Sunshine, and stay blessed.